Welcome to the Good Food CFO podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan, once again joined by our producer, Chelsea Steer.
Good morning. All right. So, Sarah, a few weeks ago, you posted a story on Instagram that got quite a bit of attention.
It did. I shared on social media that one of my clients had increased their year-over-year profits for the month of July from $19,000 to over $40,000. And it was one of those things where, we had seen the data and I was just so excited. I went to share and it got lots of hearts, lots of clap emojis, and then one reply that said, "This is so inspiring. How did they do it?" And initially I was going to, capture that and go back to stories and share it there. And then I thought, well, wait a second, I have a podcast. That's a much better place to share the how, because it's not one thing. It wasn't like a quick fix. It wasn't, this, oop, we just changed this and then magic happened, right? There's a process. And I wanted to share that process. And I want to say up front, it's not a story about how those of you listening can do the exact same things in your business, right? This is going to be a story about how this particular founder improved their profitability. And the goal that I hope to achieve is to inspire the founders listening to believe that they can look at their numbers, identify what they can improve in their businesses, and then successfully execute on whatever those things are to improve profitability in their businesses. So today, Chelsea, I thought I would walk us through the how for this founder and hopefully inspire other founders to do similar work.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. But before we jump into that, Sarah, I have a new review to share with you.
I love a new review. That's amazing.
Yeah, so this week when I was looking at our Apple dashboard to pull a review for this intro, I learned something new. So apparently the reviews that I've been looking at are just the reviews in the United States.
Okay.
And that there's actually a drop-down menu that I never saw before where you can go and look at all of the different countries around the world that have, I guess, Apple Podcast apps, right? And so I found that we actually have reviews from multiple different countries around the world.
That's so fun.
So this Apple review actually comes from Canada, and it is from the co-founder of Cook Up Inc.
Oh, I'm familiar with Cook Up. Amazing.
They said, one of the best food world podcasts we've ever heard. Easy to digest, relevant topics, and meaningful insights on every episode. Wholeheartedly recommend this listening for food entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general.
This review is making my cheeks hurt a little bit. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see me smiling. If you're not watching on YouTube now, you know that I'm smiling. I think it's very cool. Number one, to discover reviews that you didn't know you had. They've sort of been there all along. Is like opening a present that you didn't know you were getting. You know what I mean? It's very, very fun.
Or like finding $20 in your coat from last year.
Yeah, totally. Exactly like that. And so the idea of that is making me very happy. The idea that we have listeners from around the world and, in other countries is very exciting and really fun to know. I mean, we kind of knew that from the data that we can see, but we didn't know we had reviews. And so that's really lovely. And, it's been a while since I've spoken to the co-founder of Cook Up Inc. So long so that I don't remember her name specifically, but they're doing really good things out there supporting entrepreneurs who are launching businesses in Canada. And so it's amazing to hear from you. It's amazing. Like, this review is beautiful and lovely, and it's gonna go on our website for sure. So just thank you for this review. And to those of you who have reviewed from other countries that we didn't know about, we're excited to read them here on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to Cook Up Inc. As you've already stated, Sarah, like, we love seeing all of your reviews. And as you've heard us say before, your reviews on Apple especially help tell the algorithm that more people should hear this show. And that ultimately helps us in achieving our mission of changing the way food business is done. So if you've been listening and you've been enjoying the show and you haven't had a chance to do so yet, of course, we would be so grateful if you just took a few moments and shared your review with us on Apple.
Absolutely, Chelsea. It is one of the easiest ways that you can show your support for the show and stand with us in creating a more vibrant and equitable food system. And to those of you from outside of the United States, I'm just going to say that if you left a review and you're hearing this now, send us an email to hello@thegoodfoodcfo.com, or, tag us in an Instagram post. Let us know that you left a review, and we'll go to your country and find it and read it here on the podcast.
Yeah, so exciting. All right. So, Sarah, we are getting close to the end of the season. We have one more episode after this one. And then we're going to be going on our, in between season break that we typically take.
Yep.
And happening while we're on break is our book club discussion of our current selection for 1,000 Weeks.
Yes, which, by the way, several of you have already registered for. So I cannot wait to connect with you all and talk about this book.
Yeah, and I actually got my copy.
Amazing.
I got it about a week ago. So I started reading over the weekend. I'm about 20% of the way through the book, into the book. And I thought that it would be really cool for you and I to kind of check in with each other.
Okay.
Maybe share a little tease of, what we've read so far in the book, so that maybe anyone who hasn't picked up the book, isn't reading, maybe we'll encourage them to pick it up and join us for that live conversation in September.
I love that idea. I happen to have mine on my desk as well. I've been reading it in the mornings. I'm also about 20% of the way through on my second read. And I want to say that it's almost like I'm reading it for the first time. Like, I know the general concepts and things that he talks about in the book, but a lot of it is fresh and new to me. So it's been really exciting as a reread.
Yeah, there is, I think, a lot right up front, right, that he is putting in your face.
Yeah.
It just the general concept of this idea of 4,000 weeks to begin with is, he is saying that if we're lucky, we get about 4,000 weeks in our life to live. And right up front, he was like, look, in the long run, we're all going to be dead.
Yeah.
So how are you using that 4,000 weeks? How are you, I hate to say the word prioritizing, but ultimately that is what we're talking about here. Prioritizing the ways in which that you spend your time.
Yeah. And I think if someone is wondering, why is this a Good Food CFO book club selection? It is very in line, in my mind, with building a business on your own terms. And so typically when we're selecting a book, it's either going to have to do with the food industry as a whole. It's going to have to do with building a business, right? It's going to have to do with business financials, or it's going to have to do with mindset around building a business on your own terms. We are fighting against corporations, right? And industry consolidation. We are fighting against big business media, if you will, traditional business media, right? That tells us to focus on top line revenue, that tells us to grow at all costs, right? So in so many ways, the work that we're doing as good food founders and those in the industry who want to support good food founders and build a more equitable food system, we have to sort of march to the beat of our own drum. We have to drown out the noise and really be able to get centered in on what do we want? What is the business that we are trying to build? And how do I stay focused on that? And as you said, how do I prioritize the right things, perhaps, right? So that I am building the business that I want on my terms, but beyond that, building the life that I want for myself, my family, whoever is important to you in your life. And so that is why 4,000 Weeks was selected as a book for our book club. And I'm just really excited to talk with people about it.
Yeah, something I was actually just reading this morning that made me go, oh no, was he was talking about, this is where Oliver Berkman, the author, is sharing that he himself has always been a productivity geek, right? And he describes this as constantly looking for ways to optimize his schedule, optimize his calendar, optimize his time, get more done, be the most productive. And the thing that stuck out to me in reading this section was that that is something that I also do. I don't know if I'd call myself a productivity geek. I will say that I do often spend a lot of time thinking about how am I utilizing my time throughout the day? How can I optimize, right? Or
Yeah.
ensure that I'm staying on track to get all of these tasks done, rather than asking myself, is it feasible
Yeah.
to get all of these tasks done in a day? And then what ultimately happens when I don't get them done is the shame or the, guilt creeps in, and the rest of my day is kind of shot.
Yeah. I think you bring up an interesting thing, and maybe we can talk a little bit about something we've done in our business recently.
Yeah.
At the Good Food CFO, there was a moment in time, well, it has happened periodically, I think, throughout the existence of this business, where we have a to-do list, we have goals that we want to achieve, and the overwhelm sets in, this feeling of like, I cannot get everything done. And it's not because you're not managing your time or we're not managing our time properly. It's because we're attempting to do more than is feasible. And recently, what we did was we asked the question, do we have time to take on this exciting project that we really want to work on? Because we think it will improve things for the people who visit our website. We think it will improve some of our workflows internally. And so we're very excited to do it. There are positive things that will come from getting this
Yeah.
work done. But, and I won't go into all of the details, but we started to realize that maybe there isn't actually time to work on that project and get our core things done. And we did a time study. And what we found out was we don't have the time to do that thing. And some changes were going to have to happen internally. So it was sort of an expectation reset to
Yeah.
go, we cannot take on this thing because we've got these other things going on. And so what does have to happen in order for us to be able to take it on? And it's like turning that big ship around, right? It's not going to happen overnight. You can't suddenly stop doing something, right? Or stop taking care of something, but we are working toward making the changes where we do have time to work on sort of what I'll call this creative project.
Yeah. And Sarah, I love what you just said about expectation, because I think that that's something that Berkman really kind of tees us up right at the beginning of this
Yep.
book by almost resetting our expectations by asking us to accept
Yeah.
some very fundamental things,
Yep.
right? I already mentioned it.
Mm-hmm.
Accepting that you're going to die,
Yep.
accepting that there are only 24 hours in a day,
Mm-hmm.
accepting that.
You're not going to get it all done.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. To me, this book is very much it's sobering. And it's also freeing in a way. I'm going to share like a
Mhm.
little, like sort of like a side story, but it's related to the book. It has nothing to do with work. But my husband and I go away for my birthday every year. And I think a lot of people would be like, let's go somewhere new. Let's go, to a place we've never been before. We must check off these places on the map. And he kind of talks about this in the book of like, especially with social media, there are so many places you can go, so many things you can do when we think about it from a business perspective, so many things we can achieve, right? Or we quote unquote should be achieving. Circulating right now as we're recording this episode is a list of, check off this list of countries that you've been to. And my husband and I go to the same place every year because we love it, because we love the way it makes us feel, because we look forward to being there every year. And to me, that's very Baba Yacht in terms of like building a life on your
Mm.
own terms, because it's not about what other people will be impressed by. It's what fills us up and makes us happy. And that's a non-business example, but I hope it relates, right? Like, back to that Baba Yacht, back to what do I want my business to be, back to what can I focus on? What do I want to focus on? What will make me happy? What will make me proud?
Mhm. And being okay with letting the rest of it go.
Yep. Yep.
I think that something that is really interesting that he talks about in terms of, when you're in that mode where you don't want to let any of it go, is this idea of the efficiency trap.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
When you're trying to get everything on your to-do list done. And so you work to be more efficient, get the same amount of time, thinking once I clear the deck,
Yeah.
right? Then I will have time to work on this thing that will actually fulfill me or make me happy or achieve the thing in my business that I want to achieve.
Yep.
But what is the truth that Oliver shares with us?
What he says is that the more efficient we become, the more work there is to do. Historically, when you look at how productivity tools and efficiency tools have worked for people, is that they then just try to pack more into their day. They don't actually take that quote unquote extra time to do something else. He also talks a lot about distraction. And this kind of echoes back to stolen focus, where we don't have to think about our impending death and when that might happen. We don't have to think about the things we're scared of. We don't have to think about the fact that we're not chasing the big dream we might have for our business or our life if we keep ourselves busy, if we keep doing task after task, right? Rather than sitting down to do what might be most meaningful for us. And I ventured to guess that might have been part of what made this book difficult for me to read last time, but is making it really amazing to read this time. He talks a bit about procrastination and what that really is for a lot of us. There's so much good stuff in this book. And I just want to reiterate one more time that it's not about him saying, these are the ways that you make the most of your 4,000 weeks. He says, in the book, I'm not an expert at this. Like I understand it and I try to live it day to day, but I'm not perfect. And I'm not going to give you the, 3 things that will help you, to maximize your 4,000 weeks. That is not what this is about. He does offer some recommendations in terms of, like, if I'm remembering correctly, because I haven't gotten back there yet, but how to prioritize your day, how to approach your day, what kind of mindset you might be able to have.
How to think critically.
Yep.
About your day.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. So again, we chose this book because it is very aligned with Baba Yacht. It also, is making us think, and we're really interested in knowing what you all have to say about this book, how it might be changing your mind, or perhaps, we hope, helping to reinforce the Baba Yachtness for you and your business. And Chelsea, remind us once again when this book club event is happening and where folks can grab their copy of this book, because I really want this to be our biggest book club conversation yet.
Yeah, I think it has the potential to be a very sort of progressive conversation, right? Or a conversation that helps a whole community of us kind of turn a new leaf or move our lives forward. And so I agree with you. We are going to share links down in the show notes for all of this information. So if you're driving, if you're on your run right now, right, go to the show notes to get the links. Number 1, if you haven't picked up your copy of 4,000 Weeks yet, you can do so in our Good Food CFO bookshop. We're going to have the link for that in the show notes. And don't forget that when you buy from our bookshop, you are not only supporting this podcast, but lots of independent bookstores all over the country as well. Second, if you want to join us for the conversation on September 18th, I believe that's a Wednesday, we're getting together at like 11:30 in the morning. If you're on the West Coast, it's 2:30 in the afternoon. If you're on the East Coast, so right in the middle of the day, you can register on our website. Again, that link will be in the show notes. Or if you want, you can just go to thegoodfoodcfo.com and click on book club.
And the last thing I'll add there, Chelsea, is that this is an event that's open to all community members. So you do not have to be a Baba Yacht member to join. This is one way that we open the doors for connection to whomever wants to join us. If you're not a Baba Yacht, that is okay. Come and hang out with us, talk about this book, and be a part of the community.
All right, Sarah. Well, I am ready to hear this whole story about profitability.
I'm excited for you to hear it. So let's get to it.
As a good food founder, do you ever feel like your work is done in a silo? Is it difficult to feel confident in your business and financial decisions because you don't have a sounding board? Well, in our weekly CFO office hours, you'll not only get the chance to work shoulder to shoulder with the Good Food CFO herself, Sarah Delavan, but also with a small group of your peers. Together, you can support each other through the work of building a business on your own terms. Passes are available now on our website. Just visit thegoodfoodcfo.com and click on services. And now back to the show. All right, Sarah, we teased in the intro that you were going to share the story of your client who was able to more than double the profit that they brought in July 2024 over July 2023.
Yeah, it's a good
So
one.
I'm ready. Let's dig in. How did they do this?
It's the $40,000 question, isn't it? I'm really excited to dive into how they did it. But before that, I want to give a little bit of context to the situation so that the founders who are listening know a little bit more about the business without, of course, sharing any confidential information. We value our NDAs at Sarah Delavan Consulting and the Good Food CFO. But here's what I can and do want to share. Number one, this is a seasonal business. So why does that matter, right? When you have peak seasons or peak months in your business, typically that means that you also have very low profit months or even months with financial losses throughout the year, right? In those non-peak seasons or non-peak months. Just because it's not peak doesn't mean you're not paying your bills, right? Like you still have to pay rent, you still have to pay insurance, you still have to pay your bookkeepers, like things like that. So this is important because when we're talking about a seasonal business like this one, maximizing profitability during those peak months or peak seasons is very important so that they can get by, get through, right? Thrive, not just survive in those non-peak times. The other thing I want to say is that this is a young business. It is the second year of operations that we're talking about. And I think that this is important for a number of reasons. Number one, the expectation of profitability, heck, even the expectation of truly knowing what you are doing in year one can create a lot of pressure, right? I don't think it should be a thing. We want to make sure we have enough money to make it through year one, but we're going to learn a ton. And that is what this founder did. They learned a lot of lessons. They had some financial losses, and we'll talk about that in a little bit of detail, but they really utilized year one as information gathering. And we're going into year two, as we'll talk about, with questions, seeking clarity, and wanting to do better with the information they generated, right? Gained from year one. So the founder came to me during their off season and they asked the question, what do I need to do? What do I need to change to make this business profitable, not just in my peak seasons, but for the year as a whole? Another bit of context that I want to share here is that they had very good financials in terms of how they were structured and the information that the P&L specifically provided for us. Their former bookkeeper was not specialized in food, and they're the ones who actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have got a client. They are not in my area of expertise. I want them to have, a CFO and a bookkeeping team that does specialize in food. Can you take them on?" And it was really awesome, first of all, to be contacted that way. It was really awesome to have a bookkeeper say, "Hey, this is not the right fit for me, and for them, we want to get them into a better situation in terms of their advisory board, for, so to speak." And so when we brought this client on, we were able to jump right into the analysis and the strategy. We didn't have to rework and kind of reorganize the finances, and the new bookkeeping team had a pretty seamless, onboarding process with this client as well, which is really important to the work. And I think a lot of people, when they come to work with us, they can be a little disappointed when we can't jump right into the analysis and give some strategy and answers because we don't have those organized financials.
And so I think this brings up a really good question, Sarah, which is when you're talking about these good financials or organized financials, can you share maybe just a couple of things that people can either look for in their reporting or think about the way the reports are structured in order to move towards, as you're saying, these good financials in their business?
So I think the number one place to start is asking yourself, what do I want or need to know about my business? Like everything else, there is no one size fits all for a P&L, right? It depends on where you're selling your product, the type of business that you have. I'll share this. We recently had semolina pasta, we talked about in the right sizing episode, where they really shifted their business from manufacturing, right, to sell their pasta through distribution and retail to a retail store where they're making pasta now that is fresh. They're still doing the dried, right? But their business looks different. Change, the way we structure the P&L has also changed. Like one of the things, for example, is that pasta production labor no longer needs to be up in cost of goods sold because it's just not the same. And it's not giving Leah, the founder, the kind of information that she needs at this stage in her business, in this version of her business, to make spending decisions. So she and I asked the question, what do I need to see? And one of the things we needed to see was total labor in one spot, easy to see. And so that meant changing the structure of her P&L to get that, right? So start by asking yourself the question and make sure that you can see, for example, the different channels of revenue that you have, right? If you're selling direct to consumer and you're also selling to retail stores, you don't want that revenue all lumped together on one line in your P&L. You want to be able to see it separately. You want to be able to see your ingredient COGS and your packaging COGS separate from your labor COGS, if that's something that you want to have, right, in that part of your P&L. And then when it comes to your expenses and things, group them together, right? Don't get super duper intensely detailed, because if you have too much detail, it's sort of, you lose the ability to summarize, right? So you got to sort of find the sweet spot of, what information is important for me to see. What are the levers that I'm trying to push or pull in my business? And based on that, can I see the spend right in those areas and compare that to the revenue that I think, I should be increasing, for example, with that lever.
I love that. I love the idea of thinking about it as the different levers and what information is going to allow you to track the efficacy of that lever.
Yeah. Yeah. So with those good financials, we're able to, as I said, really dive into the work. And one of the other things that I want to say before we start to talk about how did they do it, is that they had no expectation that revenues would be higher in year 2 than in year 1, right? I love this because it meant that the founder was ready to focus on what was happening in the business, and they were not focused or relying on selling more to solve their profitability problem. I can't remember if this made it into John's episode or not, but he talks about this watermelon truck, right? Where there's 2 brothers and they each are selling watermelons. Maybe I'm getting the story a little bit wrong, but basically one truck, they're selling their watermelons for $4, but they cost $5 to make. And one brother says, we need to increase the price of the watermelons. And the other brother says, no, we just need to get a bigger truck so that we can sell more watermelon, right? But if you're selling watermelons at $4 and they cost you 5, no matter how big your truck is, no matter how many watermelons you sell, you're not going to be profitable, right? So the same idea applies to every business. And what this founder was saying was, I am not relying on sales. I am not relying on growing my revenue. I'm going to focus on the inside of my business and getting the economics right so that I can be profitable for the entire year and maximize my profitability in my seasonal, high points.
Okay, well, Sarah, stop teasing us. Let's get to it already. Where did you start your work with this founder?
So this might sound familiar to listeners who've been around for a little while, but step number 1 in this situation was to do a profit assessment. This is where we look at the key components of the business economics. So referring back to my episode with John, again, we needed to know if the key parts of the business were all working together or if we had an issue somewhere, right? So number one, we're looking at revenue. Is this business generating revenue? And how is that revenue being generated? This is where we confirm this is indeed a seasonal business and they have a few months of the year where the vast majority of their sales are happening and all of their profitability is happening. And it's like a 4 to 5 month window and that's it. The next thing we look at is the cost of goods sold, right? Because revenue minus cost of goods sold equals our gross profit. So we want to get an eye on what are our true cost of goods sold. Oftentimes what happens, especially if a P&L is not organized in the best way, is that things that should be considered COGS are actually showing up in the operating expense category. And so when you look at your P&L, you don't really have a true sense of what the actual cost of goods sold are. So when you put it into the profit assessment format, you can see that very, very clearly. So we looked at cost of goods sold and we looked at the gross profit margin, and then we look at operating costs. And what stood out in this case was that the gross profit margin was really low, 14%. Their operating expenses were $60,000 more than their gross profit. So when we look at this profit assessment, right, we want to know that we're generating revenue. We want to know that we've got positive gross profit margins for the year. And we also want to see that the majority of months are showing a positive gross profit margin. Because remember, your gross profit margin is what covers your operating expenses. And so if that number is negative, then you have no money to pay your operating expenses. And if that number is too low and not high enough to cover your operating expenses, as it was in this case, you are going to have losses for the month or for the year. And so they had losses of about $60,000 for year one. Diving into that a little bit further, looking at those COGS, we were able to see that total labor, both production and non-production, was 35%. Not terrible, right? Not terrible, but maybe something we could work on. And then we identified that the ingredients and packaging cost of goods was about 46%, higher than we want it to be. With some of the other COGS like shipping and things that are happening in the business, that's how we landed at a 14% profit margin.
And Sarah, we know here that 14% is not where we want to be with our profit margin.
Yeah.
So when you see something like that, I mean, what is your first thought of, this is how we're going to change this? This is how we're going to make an impact here?
Yeah, we've got to focus on the cost of goods sold. We have to get that gross profit margin number higher. Sales are not going to do it. This is a situation where increasing sales is not going to have a direct impact on the profit line, because it's actually going to create more losses in the short term until you get that volume so high, get that revenue so high that maybe you can be producing, profitability in the business. But at a 14% margin, as you're hinting, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of revenue. It's not as simple as saying, well, if we generate $60,000 more in revenue, we'll cover those losses. It doesn't work that way. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio, right? You have to, what is the math on this? Let's say we had a 20% profit margin. That would mean that we had to earn $5 in revenue for every one additional dollar on the gross profit line. Okay. Because 20% of what we earn in top line revenue is going to cost of goods sold. It is not going to hit that gross profit line. So to get $1, we've got to generate 5x.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. You're saying you would have to increase sales 500%. Yeah, that doesn't necessarily seem feasible for anybody in a year's time.
And not smart business efforts, right? Like, this is where this idea of, okay, my margins can be low, but I just need to have high volume is like, yes, it's true. But how long will that take you? How much cash will it take you to get to that point? This is the exact conversation that we had with John, right?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing here is a founder that said, I don't want to keep pumping cash into this business. Year one is one thing, but year over year, I don't want that to be the case. I want to make this business profitable so that I can do it, A, with the sales I know I can generate in a year. And then B, if I grow this business, I know what the impact from sales will be on the profit line.
Yeah, and I'm just imagining as you're talking about this, right? If I have a home, a building that's on a foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and I notice that there's a crack in that foundation, I can just put a board over it and like keep putting boards over it as fast as I need to make sure that it doesn't all crumble,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that might work for a while, but I'm probably going to be exhausted and stressed out and scared, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I can take the time to pull everything out, actually fix that crack in the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I want to add a second story, if I want to add a third story, I can build this house up as big as I want without feeling the stress of when is that crack going to break.
Yeah, I love that example. And this is again, we kind of point the finger at traditional business media a lot. What is celebrated is top line revenue. It's not typically profitability, and it's certainly not gross profit. Although I think that dialogue is starting to change. We see that changing on, on LinkedIn and different areas where founders are communicating, which I think is really, really awesome. And as you were describing with that sort of analogy and scenario of the house foundation, this founder said, you know what, I'm going to get solid in my business, but I'm not a contractor. I don't know how to fix the foundation. So I'm going to give someone a call. And that person was me. And like I said before, they came to me saying, I want to make this work. I believe in this business. We're heading into year 2. And they asked the question, what is broken in here and what do I need to do to fix it? Right. And so when we zeroed in on the fact that labor and product cogs were the primary issues driving the losses, we focused on those areas. So the very first thing we did was we looked at the product lineup, or we're just going to call it the menu for the sake of this conversation. Every item that was available for sale, we did a couple of things. Number one, we ensured that we had the proper cost of goods sold. So they have a spreadsheet where all of their products are, all of the costs and inputs are listed out. We just made sure that those formulas were correct. In this case, there were some overheads and some things that, as if you're a listener, I don't want in
Mm.
your cost of goods sold. So we took those out, made sure we were looking at just the right information that we needed to be looking at. Once we knew that we had everything correct for all of the products, we popped the price in, right? And then we're able to calculate the product margin. So we're looking D2C for this business for a margin between 60 and 70%. The other thing I love about this founder was that they were like, I'm sorry, if the top that we're looking for is 70, I'm going for 70. I'm going for 70 across the board, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of had to temper a little bit and kind of support them going, it's 60 will also be okay. You know what I mean? Like our focus here was cash flow. Our focus here was profitability, right? So we weren't just looking for 55% margin. We really were looking to push it to between 60 and 70%. So when we had all of our menu items together, we were able to say, okay, this item is way too low. Maybe it was at like a 30% margin. This one is at 50, and we didn't just write off anything that was below that target margin range. We asked ourselves a set of questions. One was, does this product draw people in? Is this a high seller? Right? So will people miss it if it's gone? And sometimes the answer was yes. And if that was the case, then we would ask ourselves, okay, let's just say it was that 30% margin item, which I can't remember the specifics on, but we'll use it as an example. We can't have one of our highest selling products be at a 30% margin. So what can we do to improve that margin and keep it on the menu? Can we get it to that 60%, on the low end, or even 55, 58, right? Like what can we get it to where it still makes sense for us and for the customer? And so that looked like maybe changing the recipe a little bit, or maybe offering a smaller size product and adjusting the price a little bit, right? Things we've talked about here on the podcast as well. And there were some items that were removed from the offering, and there were some items that got changed. And for the most part, the products all hit the target margin, but there were, I think, a few that maybe were just a little bit below, a little bit outside that 60 to 70 range. And we're comfortable with that because when we're looking at the number of products we have, the product mix, we felt confident that the overall margin would skew to that 60 to 70% range. And we felt comfortable that we could reach, the goals that we had set out for the business.
Okay, Sarah, so far I'm with you. I've heard this before. I'm familiar with the work. Was there anything else that you guys did?
The last thing we did around the menu and food costs was really look at last year's sales and created a plan for essentially ramping up production, right? So let's say that the peak month is July, right? We're not going to be producing the same amount of product in July as we are in May, or should I say in May as we are in July, right? The revenue from last year in May significantly lower than July. We needed to note that and say, okay, are we producing the full product lineup in May? Or are we producing a smaller sort of subset of the menu and growing it over time, right? Month over month as our season really starts to pick up. And that's what we decided to do. We decided to go with a core set of products in sort of the early part of the season as sales were beginning to ramp up based on the historical revenue. And they made a plan. Is this enough product to generate, let's say, $10,000 in a week, right? We
Mm-hmm.
needed to have enough product produced to be able to generate the revenue that we were projecting, but we didn't want to have $20,000 worth of product produced, right, for the week, because that would likely lead to a lot of waste. So we rely on historical data to make some projections for the future and then make a plan. Okay, this is the menu that we're going to have. These are the people we're going to have working in production to produce it, and then you have to execute on that plan. I think the one thing that is important to acknowledge here, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a couple of minutes, is that as you're implementing or executing that plan, you also have to see how it's going, right? If
Yeah.
sales were lower this year than last year, maybe we've got to reduce our production a little bit. If sales are higher and we're selling out, maybe we need to increase our production a little bit. And so keeping an eye on those things and saying, okay, that is how last year went, and we're doing things differently this year to improve our profitability, it might need some tweaking. There should not be an expectation. And I think that they did a really good job at this, that you're going to get it 100% right.
And so I would ask then, in doing this work and in that sort of ramp up of production and ramp up of labor into the peak of their season, what cues did they use to really know, like, oh, I think I have a little more revenue potential here. Maybe I need to do a little bit more, or, we're not hitting the targets. And like, what were they using to keep an eye on that?
Yeah. Well, specifically for the production and the product availability to sell, they're keeping an eye on whether they were selling out or not and what they were selling out of, right? Because that's money left on the table. And this can be really tricky because in this case, they had several products that were available. And if they're selling out of some, but not selling out of the other, is it just a matter of getting people to buy the things that are available? Or is it, no, we actually need to produce more of this product? And that's something that's going to be very specific to the business, right? Very specific to the customer and the clientele and what those things, maybe it's both. Maybe it's we're going to reduce the things that we aren't selling out of and we're going to increase the things that we are selling out of, right? To sort of balance that production labor, balance the amount of product that we have for sale. I'll give another example of this that I really love from another client. In this case, they have a retail shop and they have something that they make like fresh to order in the store. And they were selling out every day of this product by like 2:30 in the afternoon. And they have a sign outside that says like sold out for the day. But despite that sign, people were still coming in and asking if they had any of this product available. And so the founder, and the sales associates were like, hey, we're leaving money on the table here, right? Like we have an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to sell more of this product. But rather than just going, okay, how many do you think we need to order? Like, how much more do you think we need to have on hand? They actually started to track each day what time did they run out of product, and little slash marks for how many people they turned away on a given day to see if they could identify a trend. Because oftentimes what happens is you can feel like you're missing out on a lot. It could be two people, right? It could be four people. It could be not worth it, right? Or it could be 10 people, right? And that's like really, really worth it. So when they did the actual analysis, and I think they just did it for like 2 weeks, and they saw enough consistency, and we're running out by 2:30, and we've got more people coming in throughout the afternoon, despite this sign outside that says we're all sold out. People still are coming in. Let's bring in more products so that we can satisfy these customers. And they're going to continue to track, okay, we brought in more product, are we still selling out at 2:30, or are we making it to 3, right? So continuing to watch, to analyze, and to make decisions based on data, even if that data is a piece of scrap paper and just your team drawing a little line on it, that works.
Okay, Sarah, so we're talking about production. We're talking about labor here, inventory, all of that. And I know that you said that you guys, really drilled down into what were those cogs
Mm-hmm.
specifically. But another thing you mentioned at the beginning is you talked about their overall labor
Mm-hmm.
costs being that 35%. And
Mm-hmm.
I know you mentioned at the time, this is okay, it's not bad, but
Yeah.
anything that you did around that cost to continue to improve the profitability?
Yeah. So just like we did with the products, right? And calculated their cost and looked, and then, identified the price, saw what the margin was, and made some decisions. We essentially did the same thing with labor. This sounds so simple, but I think it had a huge impact. We made a spreadsheet, and for each of the months of the peak season, I shouldn't say they identified who do we need in the kitchen sort of doing the production to produce the products we want to have, and how will that ramp up month over month. We had their hourly rate there, we had the number of hours we suspected that they would need to work to execute, and then we also have non-production labor. So this is like sales labor, right? Other associated payroll with running the business. What is going to be the schedule for those folks? How many people do we need? How is that going to change throughout sort of the ramp up and sort of then the downfall, if you will, of the peak season? And again, we posted the hourly rate in the spreadsheet. We made a schedule, and we saw, okay, based on these numbers, based on this payroll math, we're going to tack on, 10% for payroll taxes, et cetera, et cetera. What percentage of our projected revenue is this labor? And the cool thing is that based on this schedule, we saw a reduction in the projected labor cost percentage, right? So it went from 35 actually down to 20% in the peak seasons, or you
Wow.
know what I mean? The peak of
Yeah.
the season. So they're just like with the production team on the early side of the season, or almost like right before things kick in, there's going to be pre-production. You've got to be prepared. So what we knew was there were going to be folks on the schedule and some pre-production happening, those things that you can that have a longer shelf life, those things that you can make and they'll be fine and just great to sell in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, whatever, right? As
Mm-hmm.
opposed to the things that are more like just in time. We knew that our labor and our, cost of goods sold were going to be high compared to revenue going into that month. But because it was controlled, and because we knew going in, okay, we're going to have a loss. We're projecting a loss of X amount of dollars, but we're going to make up for it if we can stick to this plan and execute it in the following 3, 4, 5 months. We're okay with it, right? And it's being done for a purpose. And they knew that purpose ahead of time. So we really, and I keep saying I provided some guidance. They did the work, right?
Yeah.
To really think through, how many people do I need? And if and when, and I don't remember that the projection was ever too high for labor, but if it was the case, then we'd have to go, okay, well, we can't have this extra person here, or we need to make this a shorter shift, or you know what I mean? So it was like literal planning for the team, and then came the execution part.
I love that, because I think it is a constant balance when you are approaching growth in your business, right? It is a constant balance of making sure that you have enough product and the right amount of people in
Mm-hmm.
place to increase those sales, but also, minimizing your
Yeah.
waste.
Yeah.
So I think my next question would be is if you are paying attention to those things, if you are incrementally, right, pulling those levers and making the adjustments to, like we're talking about, maximize your revenue, what does the follow up to that look like? Like when you're talking about tracking these things, how often should they be tracking? What specific things, maybe you can answer that or not, should they be looking at?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And this is another thing that I know differs from founder to founder. So I want to say that like as the fractional CFO for a number of companies, I do not report the same information to every one of my clients, and I do not report information in the same way to every client. This is something I think that makes us unique, is that I don't have like a template where we say this is the information we report on every week or every month for all of our businesses, and this is how it goes. It's so customized, and it depends on how busy is the founder, what is their financial literacy, right? We've got some founders who are deep in it. They know what they're talking about. They know the lingo, the language. They're like the more data the better. And then we've got other founders who are like, can I have just the need to know information that I can see, that you provide the context for, so that I can take action? The way we operated with this founder was more on that end, where they were like, I want to know if I'm on track or off track, and I want to know it in a time frame that I can make a change.
Mm.
So the reporting then was weekly. So every week, either on a Monday or a Tuesday, usually a Tuesday, because we've got like money hitting the bank from the weekend. On a Monday, we can kind of do a cash flow update, and we can see what the sales were from over the weekend. Weekends are, typically busy for a lot of different types of food businesses, no matter how you're selling your product. So on a Tuesday morning, we're pulling sales data, we're pulling payroll numbers, and we're pulling general spending. So just like other spending. We made the decision not to zero in on cost of goods sold, and rather just to keep it a little more general in terms of, are we on track or off track with our non-payroll spending? If we identified an issue, we would zero in on that. Because the other thing that we did that I think is important to mention that we haven't mentioned yet is we had a 12-month forecast built out. So the revenue looked the same as last year. The cost of goods sold were modified to represent what we had developed as our COGS projection. The labor costs had changed based on, again, our projections. And then we have these known operating expenses. They did do a little bit of work additionally in identifying any operating expenses that weren't necessary or weren't adding value to the business. So there were a couple of subscriptions that got eliminated, things that sort of kind of tightened up the ship, if you will, to make that break even number a little bit lower.
Mm-hmm.
So really, they did look through their entire business. When we pull these numbers together, I'm reporting them in the following way. And I think this is kind of fun to share. Here's your revenue goal for the month. Let's say the monthly revenue goal is $100,000, just to keep it simple. If we've assumed that every month has 4 weeks, and we actually do it, I do it specifically based on like the percentage of the month that has gone by. But for today and here, I'm going to keep it really simple. If the goal for the month is $100,000 in revenue and we've completed 1 week of the month, you should be at $25,000. Right? And so we would say your actual revenue is $20,000, right? You're at 20% instead of 25. So putting it in context, we're a little bit behind on sales, and we're down by about 5%. Your payroll is on track for the projection, but is not on track for the actuals, right? And then is your general spending, we looked at 2 things here. Is it on track or off track? And are you cash flow positive or cash flow negative for the month? Those are the pieces of information that this founder and I thought would be the most helpful, the most high level, so that if something got off track, they would know right away. The only area that we had a small issue was general spending. And when we identified, hey, this general spending is outpacing your revenue for the month, we need to pull it back. They just pulled it back, and we were able to get right back on track. So it didn't even require digging into the specifics of, where could we stop spending or where could we save? They just made those decisions on their own to get that spending back on track. And it's literally, I think, seeing the numbers every week is just a reminder to keep thinking about it, to keep paying attention to spending, to keep paying attention to that payroll schedule, right? So even if things are, and even when things are going perfectly, continuing to look at those numbers is valuable, right? And then you've got a weird week or a weird month where things are off track, but you also aren't panicked because you're seeing the information weekly and you're like, I got this. I need to
Yeah.
make a change. I can communicate it to my team.
So, you know, I think my next question, Sarah, is as we talked about at the beginning, they went from July of 2023, $19,000 in profit. July of 2024, over $40,000 in profit, right? But when we look at all of the steps that they took to get there, all of the work that you were able to do together, what does that process really look like in terms of a timeline?
That's a really great thing to bring up, Chelsea, because none of this happens overnight, right? As I mentioned at the beginning, we had good financials to start with, so we were able to jump right in. They had their cost of goods sold, for their products laid out. So it was just a matter of looking at that data and making sure that it was all accurate, right? So in this case, I think we spent about 3 months digging into this information, right? Spending time on the cost of goods sold and then making a plan for the cost of goods sold, then looking at the labor and making a plan, tweaking that plan, then creating a financial forecast, right? I would say we dedicated nearly a month, probably around 3 weeks to each thing, meeting bi-weekly throughout the process, right? So we would have a meeting, we'd do some work together, do some analysis. Sometimes they would have to go and make some decisions, right? Okay, we're asking questions like, how do I want to modify this product? I mean, that's not something that you just go, this is exactly how I'm going to do it. I
Yeah.
have the answer right now. It's good to take time to think about that, right? And so sometimes it'd be 2 weeks, we'd get back together, they would have some answers. Sometimes we'd be utilizing meetings as a work session where it's like, okay, let's lay out the labor together. A lot of clients are not super spreadsheet savvy. And so if you have the information in your head, I can get it down on the spreadsheet and make it all make sense so that we have a number to work with, right? So I would say it was about 3 months for the full planning process. And then we were ready to execute. There were some other things that they also took into consideration: special events, special projects, other ways that the business generates money in the peak season. And we also looked at sort of, how we can structure those to be profitable. But this was really the core work. And again, I think you bring up a really great question because there is an expectation, I think, especially sometimes when people are onboarding with a fractional CFO, that we can look at the numbers and have answers. It's really a collaboration. The client is doing the work. The client is the one who has to execute, right? We could plan all day together and then they can go out there and not execute. And that has happened in the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I have is ideas. What I have is examples, proof, strategies that if we implement them, they can work, they can create the outcomes that we are predicting. The onus is on the founder. And in this case, we spent about 3 months getting ready and then they stuck to the plan. And when things needed to change, they were smart about it, right? They did pay attention to and brought questions to me. Hey, we're selling out of this thing, but we're not selling out of that thing. Instead of just saying, make more, right? They really were thoughtful about it. Let's pull back on some of this production. Let's amp up, the production of these other goods, and just really have been dialed in to their work every single day.
And honestly, I love that this doesn't sound like a super complicated process, right? The work of looking at your numbers, making a plan, and executing on that plan.
Yeah. It's not difficult, but it does take time and it requires organization of information. And I think that's where oftentimes I say that's where I come in. I'm an organizer of information. The founder, or the leadership of a team, they have the expertise in their business. What I bring to the table is organizing the information that they have so that the team can make decisions. And that's what we did here. So some founders can do it on their own, right? Some founders have a brain that works like mine, where you hear a set of numbers and you can visualize them and put them in a spreadsheet to then make decisions with it. Others, like this founder, are not experts in spreadsheets, but they are an expert in design. They are an expert in flavor. They are an expert in creating a mood and a feeling so that people want to buy their product. And so we made a great partnership in them bringing the information that they do have to me, allowing me to help them organize it, and then executing. So I say that because this is the very reason that I work as a CFO fractionally for a number of clients. This is the reason we have profit assessments and other tools on the website, right? To provide that guidance, give you the framework to do this type of thinking. It's the reason we have office hours. No one should be expected to know how to do this on their own, how to get every aspect of owning and operating their business right from day one or even in year 10, right? I think we
Yeah.
all need help and support in different areas of our business. And hopefully this encourages people, this conversation, to go, okay, if I dig into this work, if I pay attention to these things in my business that do need to change, and I make some hard decisions sometimes, but if I do that and I execute, we can be successful, we can be profitable, and I can build the business of my dreams on my terms.
If you'd like to learn more about any of the tools or resources mentioned in today's episode, visit thegoodfoodcfo.com.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.